My husband told the hospital staff I was experiencing postpartum psychosis while I was in active labor with our second child. My name is Evelyn. I'm 38 years old. And that sentence shouldn't be real, but it is. I'd been clear. Only Gabriel in the delivery room. I'd said it 6 times over 3 months. Made him promise. Discussed it with our marriage counselor when I was 7 months pregnant because the first delivery had been a disaster. He'd looked me in the eye each time and agreed. Then his mother burst through the door at 8 centimeters. "I'm here," she announced to the nurses. "Not to me. Never to me. I need to be consulted on all medical decisions. My daughter-in-law isn't stable." Daughter-in-law? Not Evelyn? Not her name? Just her function in the family structure. "Get her out." I looked at Gabriel, my husband, the man who'd promised. Now. He turned to the medical staff instead. Calm, reasonable. The voice he used when he needed people to trust him. "My wife is experiencing some postpartum psychosis. She needs to calm down for the baby's sake." I wasn't postpartum. I was still pregnant, still in labor, still waiting for someone to protect me. The nurses looked at him, then at his mother, then at me. They chose him. His mother stayed through the entire delivery, stood right there while I pushed, while I tore, while I begged them to make her leave, and they just kept telling me to breathe and focus on the baby. She was the first person to hold my son after the nurses cleaned him and handed him to me. Not hold him herself. She didn't take him from my arms. She just leaned over the delivery bed while I was still bleeding, still attached to monitors, still trying to process what had just happened, and she took photos. Multiple photos, different angles. Smiling. Her hand on my shoulder like we were close, like I wanted her there. I heard the camera click while I was still delivering the placenta. 10 minutes later, while a nurse was stitching me up and I was trying to focus on my newborn son's face, my phone started buzzing with notifications. She'd posted them. All of them. With captions about her new grandbaby, her blessing, her joy. 200 likes before I was even cleaned up. I wanted privacy for the most vulnerable moment of my life. She wanted social media content. That's an important distinction. My own mother visited 4 hours later, brought flowers, asked to hold the baby, looked at me with that expression I'd known since I was 14, and asked her uncle to stop commenting on my developing body. "Your mother-in-law just wants to be involved, sweetheart. You've always been so dramatic about boundaries." She adjusted my son's blanket. "You should be grateful for the help." Dramatic about boundaries. The same words she'd used when I was 16, when I was 23 and didn't want her planning my entire wedding, when I was 32 and asked for 1 hour alone after my daughter's birth. She had no right to be in that room. My voice sounded flat, clinical, the therapist voice I'd learned in graduate school. I explicitly said no. Family is complicated. My mother smiled at my sleeping son. "You'll understand when he's grown and you just want to be part of his important moments." She left 20 minutes later, took photos of her own first, posted them with captions about both her grandchildren now, got 150 likes and dozens of comments about how blessed our family was. I stared at my phone, at the evidence of my own erasure, at 200 people celebrating my boundary violation while I sat in a hospital bed trying to figure out when I'd stopped mattering. This wasn't new. That was the problem. 13 years of marriage, 13 years of my mother-in-law choosing our wedding venue after I'd selected a different one, keeping a house key she used freely, walking in whenever she wanted, making decisions about our lives, our money, our children without asking, commenting on my body 2 months postpartum with my daughter, whispering to Gabriel about my housekeeping, my parenting, my worth. She'd lost her older son 13 years ago. Car accident. Gabriel was 27. I was 25 and newly married and trying to be understanding while she crushed us both with her grief. Grief explained it. Grief didn't make it acceptable. 6 years ago, when I was in labor with my daughter, she'd done the same thing. Burst into the delivery room, stayed despite my objections, took photos, posted them, and every time I raised concerns, Gabriel said the same thing. "That's just how she is." Not, "I'll talk to her." Not, "You're right, that's not okay." Just acceptance, resignation. The path of least resistance that always led straight through me. But this time I'd been explicit. Multiple conversations, multiple promises. A full session with our marriage counselor at 36 weeks where he told Gabriel directly that his mother's involvement was inappropriate. Gabriel had nodded, agreed, promised he understood. Then he texted her when my contractions started. I had the receipts, found his phone while he was getting coffee, saw the message. Labor started. St. Mary's, room 307. Sent 20 minutes after we'd arrived, while I was still being admitted, while he was still promising me it would be different this time. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't made a mistake. He'd chosen. I'm a licensed family therapist. AIM. I took time off when my daughter was born 6 years ago because Gabriel said we didn't need my income, and his mother kept making comments about daycare destroying children's attachment. But I'd maintained my license, paid for continuing education courses myself, did supervision hours with a senior clinician monthly. I knew all the clinical terms: enmeshment, triangulation, parentification. I could have written the textbook on dysfunctional family systems. Knowing the terminology didn't make living in one any less suffocating. 2 weeks after I brought my son home, I packed both children while Gabriel was at work. Didn't overthink it, didn't make a 40-page pros and cons list like I usually did. Just put their clothes in suitcases, their favorite toys in boxes, and loaded my car while my daughter asked if we were going on vacation. Something like that, I told her. I left a note on the kitchen counter. I'm filing for divorce. Not an explanation. Not a justification. Just fact. My sister answered the door at her house looking surprised, then just moved aside and let us in. Made up the guest room without asking questions. Heated up chicken nuggets for my daughter while I nursed my son. Are you sure? She asked later. The third time. Mom and Dad are going to be devastated. Probably. I was too tired to process her worry, too tired to manage anyone else's feelings about my decision. They'll try to fix it. You know how they are. I knew exactly how they were. I'd spent 38 years learning. That night I sat in my sister's guest room at midnight. Both children asleep, my 6-year-old daughter curled in the twin bed, my 2-week-old son in the portable crib. Everything we owned in 6 suitcases and 4 boxes. I'd spent 13 years being dismissed by my husband, minimized by my own mother, erased by a woman who saw me as an incubator and an obstacle, and my children were learning to accept it, learning that mommy's voice didn't matter, that mommy's boundaries were optional, that mommy asking to be treated with basic dignity made her difficult, dramatic, unstable. I wanted to teach them that their voices mattered. Gabriel wanted to teach them that keeping peace meant swallowing themselves whole. Some lessons are worth any cost. I would rather rebuild alone than raise children who thought being erased was the same as being loved. Gabriel's first call came at 6 a.m. the day after I left. We just need to talk, he said. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I understand why you left. Just the assumption that talking would fix what 15 years of talking hadn't touched. I hung up. He called 14 more times that week. Left voicemails that started reasonable and ended desperate. Showed up at my sister's house 3 days later with roses, and that expression he used when he needed me to be understanding. My sister answered the door. Took the flowers. Told him I wasn't ready. Watched him drive away and then threw the roses in the trash without asking me first. He doesn't get to perform reconciliation on your doorstep, she said. I loved her for that. But Gabriel wasn't the only one deploying. His mother called his sister, his father, extended family I'd met twice at weddings, all of them with the same script, just different voices. His sister called on day 5. You're being cruel. He made a mistake. We all make mistakes. One mistake. Singular. Like 15 years of dismissal and 1 delivery room betrayal were equivalent to forgetting an anniversary. His father sent 3 emails about forgiveness, about children needing both parents, about how marriage requires sacrifice and commitment. I wondered if he'd used the same words when his wife had controlled their son's entire adult life. Then my own parents joined the chorus. Marriage requires work, sweetheart. My mother's voice on the phone was gentle, reasonable, concerned. You've always had a tendency to quit things when they get difficult. Quit things. Like my master's degree I'd finished while working full-time. Like the private practice I'd built from nothing. Like 15 years of trying to be enough for a man who'd chosen his mother over me at every turn. I'm not quitting, I said. I'm leaving. That sounds like the same thing to me? It wouldn't. That was the problem. The family dinner happened 2 weeks after I'd moved out. My mother called it a family meeting. My sister called it an ambush and offered to come with me, but I went alone because I needed to see it clearly. My parents' dining room, the table where I'd eaten Sunday dinners for 38 years, roast chicken and potatoes in the china my grandmother had left her. My mother served food. My father said grace. Then they looked at me like a problem that required solving. People at church are asking questions, my mother said. She wasn't eating, just rearranging her potatoes. The Hendersons asked if you and Gabriel were having trouble. The pastor's wife mentioned she hadn't seen you at service. Not, How are you holding up? Not, what do you need? Just concern about what the church friends were thinking. I'm sorry if my divorce is socially inconvenient, I said. Don't be sarcastic. My father used his disappointed voice, the one that used to make me apologize for things that weren't my fault. Your mother is trying to help you see how this affects everyone. Everyone, not me, not my children. Everyone else who had to answer awkward questions. You're embarrassing the family. My mother finally looked at me. And I think you're being hasty. All marriages have difficult periods. Did your difficult periods include your mother-in-law posting photos of you bleeding on social media? My mother flinched. Marriage requires working through hard things. I could have left your father a dozen times over the years, times when things were difficult and I felt unsupported, but I chose to stay. That's what commitment means. There it was. The comparison. Her suffering made noble by endurance, mine made dramatic by refusal. I wanted to ask what those dozen times were, whether she'd stayed out of love or fear or just because leaving required more courage than staying, but I already knew she'd never tell me. I'm not you, I said. No. She cut her chicken precisely. You're not. I left before dessert. The next week I started working part-time at a family services nonprofit. 25 hours a week, $42,000 annually. Less than I'd made 8 years ago, but it was mine. My name on the paychecks. My income independent from a man who'd been controlling our finances while his mother controlled him. The office manager was a woman named Sandra, who'd gone through a messy divorce 7 years earlier. She looked at my resume and didn't ask why there was a gap. Just handed me my employee handbook and said, "You'll be okay." It doesn't feel like it yet, but you will. I wanted to believe her. I hired a divorce attorney the same week. Patricia Morrison, 58 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, office that smelled like leather and old books. Mediation is usually the best path, she said after I'd explained everything. Contested divorces are expensive, time-consuming, emotionally exhausting. I want full discovery. She looked up. That's aggressive. His mother has been making financial decisions about our family money. He's been lying about business trips. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with. She studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Shark smile. Let's file the motions. The documents started arriving 3 weeks later. Bank statements, business accounts, credit card records going back 7 years. Gabriel had maintained separate business accounts the entire marriage. Statements sent to his office address, not our home. That's why I'd never seen the full picture. Not oversight, design. And buried in those statements was his mother's name. Co-signer on business loans from 3 years ago. The timing matched when his consulting work had started struggling and he'd stopped discussing finances with me. She hadn't just been boundary violating. She'd been bankrolling, and when you bankroll someone's life, you get voting rights on how they live it. Over several weeks, as more documents arrived, the pattern became undeniable. The mother-in-law making financial decisions about our family money, approving expenditures, blocking others, her involvement escalating significantly as Gabriel's business faltered. This complicates asset division, Patricia said. She was going through the third box of statements. If she has legal claims to business assets, we need to determine how that affects the marital estate. I stared at the evidence. 3 years of control I hadn't known about, backed by actual money and legal documents. Then I found the hotel charges. Morton's Steakhouse. April the 14th, the day Gabriel said he was in Chicago for a client meeting. Except the restaurant was 10 miles from our house. Embassy Suites, June 3rd. The night he'd texted saying his flight was delayed and he'd stay near the airport. Except the Embassy Suites was downtown. The Riverside Inn. September 22nd. Another business dinner that happened in our own city. I brought them to Patricia. She requested email correspondence. The attorney found messages between Gabriel and his sister. References to the situation. Discussions about what mom knows. Dates that aligned with the hotel charges. I called Gabriel's sister directly. Not to confront, to ask questions, to meet for coffee and build rapport by acknowledging how hard this must be for her too. To plant seeds over weeks of careful, persistent conversation. I know you're in a difficult position, I told her at our third coffee meeting. Between your mother and your brother. Between family loyalty and what you know is right. She stirred her latte, didn't look at me. Does your mother control your marriage too? I asked. Her hand stopped moving. She has opinions. Quiet, careful. About how we raise our daughter, about money, about where we live. Do you want your daughter growing up watching this pattern? That's when she broke. Not dramatic, not loud. just tears sliding down her face while she sat very still in the coffee shop and finally said what she'd been carrying. Mom knew. Her voice was barely audible. About Gabriel's affair. She knew and told us all to keep quiet because all men make mistakes, and it was your job to forgive him. The affair I'd suspected, the confirmation I'd needed. There's more. She was crying harder now. 9 years ago, Gabriel told Mom he was unhappy, that he was considering separation. She threatened to call in his business loans if he left, told him all men have doubts but family is forever. 9 years. He'd been planning his exit for 9 years, while I'd been clipping coupons and believing we were building something together. She did the same thing to my husband 3 years ago, the sister continued, when he got a job offer in another state. Better pay, better opportunities. She told him family stays close, and if we moved, she'd cut us off financially. We stayed, and I hate myself for it. She looked at me finally. I have a daughter now, and I don't want her growing up thinking this is normal, that women exist to be controlled, that keeping peace means swallowing yourself whole. I reached across the table, took her hand. Then don't teach her that. I started the blog that night. Not for revenge, not for exposure, just to process what I was learning. To put words to the pattern I'd been living inside. I called it Enmeshed, One Therapist's Journey Out of Family Dysfunction. I wrote about boundaries and triangulation and parentification. Clinical terms for the suffocation I'd experienced. I shared it on forums for people dealing with difficult in-laws. Posted links in parenting communities where I'd been commenting for years under my real name, which gave me credibility. Within 3 weeks, I'd written a post about the hospital betrayal. Raw. Detailed. Everything I'd felt while pushing out my son, with his grandmother taking photos for social media. A parenting blogger with 50,000 followers shared it. My following jumped to 8,000 people overnight. 8,000 strangers reading my pain and commenting me too. Sharing their own stories of mothers-in-law who treated them like incubators. Husbands who chose their mothers over their wives. Families who demanded forgiveness without requiring change. I read every comment. Responded when I could. Built community in my living room at midnight while my children slept. And I realized something sitting there with evidence of financial control spread across my sister's kitchen table and messages from 8,000 women who'd lived versions of my story. This wasn't just about Gabriel's lies or his mother's manipulation. This was systematic, multi-generational. His mother had controlled his father, then controlled him. Now she was trying to control me, and if I didn't stop it, she'd move on to my daughter next. The affair wasn't the betrayal. The hospital wasn't the betrayal. Those were symptoms. The betrayal was 15 years of Gabriel choosing his mother's comfort over my dignity while she systematically dismantled my autonomy through money and secrets and social pressure. He hadn't just been complicit. He'd been her weapon. And now I had documentation. Financial records, email evidence, his own sister's testimony, 8,000 witnesses to the pattern. I looked at my sister across her kitchen table. This is going to be a fight, I said. She nodded. I know. A public one. His mother won't go quietly. Good. My sister's voice was hard, final. Let her fight. Let everyone see exactly who she is. I saved all the financial documents, backed up the emails, screenshot every hotel charge and restaurant receipt, because some fights are worth having, and some truths are worth documenting, even when your own family tells you to keep quiet, especially then. 2 months of blog posts, 35,000 followers, women commenting with their own stories of controlling in-laws and dismissive partners who chose their mothers over their wives. I'd write at midnight after the children slept. Clinical observations wrapped in personal narrative. The language of family systems therapy applied to my own suffocation. The local parenting website noticed. Asked me to write occasional pieces about family boundaries. I said yes. My sister called immediately. Writing publicly might complicate custody proceedings. Everything complicates custody proceedings, I told her. At least this way I'm telling the truth. What they didn't know was that truth has a way of protecting itself. Documentation isn't just evidence, it's accountability. The pushback had started early. My mother had called 3 days after I posted about the hospital incident. People at church recognized the story, she said. Not, are you okay, or I'm sorry that happened. Just concern about the church friends knowing. You're airing family business online? I'm writing the truth. But people are talking? I ended the call, because I'd spent 38 years managing her embarrassment, and I was done performing dignity for people who'd never offered me any. The mother-in-law escalated predictably, posted old family photos on social media, broken families, forgiveness, tagged mutual friends in every single one. Several people from my church reached out, asked me to reconsider divorce, told me marriage requires sacrifice. I wanted to ask if they'd sacrifice their dignity, their autonomy, their children's futures, but I already knew they'd never had to choose. Then financial discovery revealed what I'd suspected but couldn't prove. Gabriel's business had been failing for 3 years, and his mother had been funneling money to keep it afloat while maintaining veto power over major family decisions. Not loans. Investment with strings attached, the kind that came with voting rights on how we lived our lives. Patricia laid out the bank statements in her office. She's been approving expenditures, blocking others. Legal cosigner status gives her legitimate claim to consultation on business decisions. And he never told me. He didn't have to. The money came with built-in loyalty. I stared at the numbers. 3 years of control I hadn't known about, backed by actual money and legal documents and my husband's willingness to sell our autonomy for his mother's financial rescue. That's not family helping family. That's purchasing people. The sisters' revelation came during our 5th coffee meeting. Mom called someone at your workplace 3 years ago. She wasn't looking at me, just stirring her untouched latte. Asked questions about your promotion, your travel schedule, framed it as concern about the children. The promotion I didn't get. The one where they'd said I wasn't available enough for the position, even though my metrics were the highest in the department. 3 years ago, right when I'd been building towards senior clinician status, right when I'd been this close to financial independence. She sabotaged my career. Not a question. A recognition. The sister nodded. She said families need mothers at home, that your ambition was hurting the kids. I sat very still, processing what this meant. The mother-in-law hadn't just controlled our present. She'd systematically dismantled my future, called my employer, planted seeds, made me look unreliable at the exact moment I'd been building toward freedom. This wasn't just boundary violation. This was calculated destruction of my autonomy. I called my former boss that afternoon. She was reluctant. I can't discuss personnel matters. I'm in divorce proceedings, gathering evidence of interference. I kept my voice clinical, professional, the therapist tone that made people trust me. I need to know if someone called about me 3 years ago. Long pause. A call was received. Someone claiming to be a concerned family member. Questions about your availability for the position. Around promotion time. Yes. Did it influence the decision? Another pause. Longer. I can't definitively say, but the timing coincided with concerns about your availability, and those concerns became part of the discussion. I thanked her, hung up, sat in my car outside the nonprofit, and finally let myself feel it. She'd stolen my promotion, my financial independence, my path out, not through lies, through implications, concerned questions, the kind that plant doubt without making accusations. She hadn't just been intrusive. She'd been strategic, and I'd been building my escape while she was systematically burning every exit. The mother-in-law filed for grandparents' rights 2 weeks later. Patricia reviewed the case. The financial contributions create some leverage, but the pattern of boundary violations and your documented objections give us a strong defense. But not guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed. 2 months passed. Court date scheduled. 2 days before the hearing, she showed up at my workplace. I was in a session when Sandra knocked. Evelyn, there's a situation in the lobby. I could hear her from the hallway, screaming, sobbing, my name over and over. She's destroying my son, keeping me from my grandchildren. I gave them everything, and this is how they repay me. I've already lost one son, and I can't lose another. Multiple colleagues in the lobby, donors waiting for appointments, the executive director trying to calm her. Security escorted her out while she sobbed about her dead son, about sacrifice, about family. The building cameras captured everything. My supervisor called me into her office an hour later. Are you okay? First question. Not what happened or who was that. Just concern about me. I nodded. Couldn't speak yet. We'll back you if you need us. Security footage is available if it helps with legal proceedings. I requested the copies through official channels. Patricia submitted them as evidence. But then something unexpected happened. A colleague who'd witnessed the incident mentioned it in a private support group for nonprofit workers. Didn't name me. Just described the situation. The story was picked up. Shared. Details that made it identifiable spreading across forums. Within 48 hours, someone made the connection to my blog. My following jumped to 65,000 people overnight. Strangers sharing the workplace video, reading my posts, connecting the dots between the woman screaming about her dead son and the pattern I'd been describing for months. I sat in my sister's living room at midnight watching it spread, comments multiplying, shares climbing. My carefully documented pattern suddenly visible to everyone. The mother-in-law's public breakdown had revealed exactly what I'd been writing about. Her grief weaponized into control, her loss transformed into entitlement, her pain used as justification for destroying everyone around her. And now 65,000 people could see it. Not through my description, through her own actions, captured on security footage, witnessed by professionals. Undeniable. This exposure could destroy my custody case, prove I'd been publicly airing family business, show I'd been building a platform while my marriage crumbled, or it could validate everything I'd been saying. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need a defense. It just needs a witness. And now I had 65,000 of them. The local news picked up the story 3 days later. Family conflict, workplace boundaries. A grandmother's public breakdown captured on security footage. My editor at the parenting website called that afternoon. We want you to do a weekly column. Boundaries, family systems, divorce. Same rate as the one-offs but consistent platform. I said yes before she finished the sentence. 2 weeks after that, a literary agent named Rebecca Marsh emailed. She'd been following my blog for months and wanted to discuss turning it into a book. Not a memoir. A guide for people trying to leave enmeshed family systems. Your clinical background gives you authority, she said during our first call, and your story gives you accessibility. That combination is marketable. Marketable. The word tasted strange, but I signed with her anyway. 3 months of negotiations followed. Publisher offers that came in lower than expected. Revisions to the book proposal. Conference calls where Rebecca pushed back on advances that wouldn't even cover a year's rent. Financial stress mounting while legal bills kept arriving, and I supported myself on $42,000 annually. I wanted the book deal to solve everything. Publishers wanted content at a discount. That's an important distinction. The final offer came through in March, $60,000 advance. After Rebecca's 15% in taxes, I'd clear maybe $38,000. Helpful, but not life-changing. Not enough to stop working 3 jobs. Not enough to buy a house, or pay off my legal fees or breathe easily. I accepted it anyway, because $38,000 was more than zero, and the platform was worth more than money. My blog followers hit 85,000 the week I signed the contract. A week later, an older woman approached me after I spoke at a community center about co-parenting with difficult in-laws. She had silver hair and kind eyes, and a business card that read Dr. Patricia Chen, LMFT. I went through something similar 30 years ago, she said. Different details, same pattern. His mother controlled the money, and he chose her comfort over my dignity every single time. We had coffee the next week. She told me about her divorce in 1994, before the internet, before support groups, when leaving an enmeshed family system meant complete isolation. You're doing it differently, she said. Building community, creating resources. That matters. Dr. Chen became a mentor, introduced me to professional networks, encouraged me to consider returning to clinical practice once I was ready. You have something most therapists don't, she told me during our 3rd meeting. You've lived what you're treating. That's not a liability. That's credibility. 5 months after I'd filed for divorce, 3 months after the mother-in-law filed for grandparents' rights, we went to court. The judge was a woman in her 50s who'd reviewed every piece of evidence. Bank statements showing financial manipulation, security footage of the workplace incident, email correspondence, my documentation of repeated objections going back years, testimony from witnesses including my former supervisor and Dr. Chen as an expert on family systems. The mother-in-law's attorney argued grief, loss, a grandmother's right to relationship. Patricia countered with pattern, control, systematic boundary violation. The judge dismissed the case in 4 minutes. Then she added a 6-month no-contact order. The mother-in-law was prohibited from any contact with my children until September. I watched her face when the judge spoke. The color draining, the confusion. Like she genuinely couldn't understand how loving her grandchildren so much could result in court-ordered distance. She'd wanted to own them. The judge saw the difference. 2 months later, 7 months after filing, the divorce was finalized. Primary custody, mine. Retirement account split, but the larger portion mine given the financial manipulation, and the marital home awarded to me entirely. During discovery, Patricia had found that the mortgage payments the mother-in-law claimed where loans were characterized as gifts in her own earlier financial records. She had attempted to reframe them during divorce proceedings, but her own documentation contradicted her. The judge called it a factor supporting claims of financial control and manipulation. $300,000 of equity. Mine. Because she'd been so confident in her control that she'd never imagined she might lose it. Gabriel's sister texted me the week after the divorce finalized. Her mother's church community had seen the viral video. Several members had begun distancing themselves. Her volunteer position coordinating the nursery had been quietly reassigned. Some people still sympathize with her grief, the sister wrote, but others are asking questions she can't answer. Gabriel's business collapsed under the debt his mother had created. He declared bankruptcy in May, moved into a small studio apartment on the south side. The following months blurred together, book writing slower than expected, my editor pushing back on chapters, asking for revisions, wanting more clinical framework, and less raw emotion, even though the raw emotion was what readers connected with. I worked my nonprofit job during the day, wrote at night after the children slept, responded to reader emails at midnight, built something from exhaustion and clarity, and the knowledge that I was teaching my daughter her voice mattered more than keeping peace. 10 months after the divorce finalized, 17 months after I'd left my marriage, my book was published. Regional bestseller within 6 weeks. 15,000 copies sold in the first 6 months. Invitations to speak at support groups and community centers about family boundaries and recovering from enmeshed systems. I began working part-time at a group therapy practice, $90 per hour, supervised clinical hours, rebuilding toward independent licensure, still renting, still saving, still rebuilding. But my children were in therapy and showing progress. My daughter's grades were improving. My son was adjusting to the new routine. A young woman named Maria attended one of my speaking events. Afterwards, she asked to talk. Controlling mother-in-law, husband who chose his mother's comfort over Maria's dignity. The same pattern with different details. I mentored her, gave her the roadmap I'd built. My mother sent a letter in August. She'd read the book. It had been hard to see herself in it. She'd talked to her own therapist about patterns in our family. Other women at church had shared the book with her and asked questions that made her reflect on her own choices. She wanted to talk. I hadn't decided yet, because I would only rebuild that relationship on honest foundation or not at all. One afternoon in September, I was at a coffee shop when my mother-in-law walked in. She looked older, tired, the carefully maintained appearance cracking at the edges. She saw me, hesitated, then approached. "Can we talk?" Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. 5 minutes, I said. She sat down, hands folded, eyes red. "I heard about your book." Not accusatory, just defeated. "My son won't speak to me anymore. People at church have changed toward me. I just wanted to be a family." "You wanted control," I said. "There's a difference. I've already lost one son. Tears now. Real ones. I can't lose another." I looked at this woman who'd stolen my promotion, posted photos of me bleeding on social media, crashed both my deliveries, controlled my husband's business through debt, showed up at my workplace screaming. This woman who'd weaponized her grief into entitlement for 12 years. "Your first son's death was tragedy," I said. "Losing your second son is consequence. You tried to own him instead of love him, and you pushed him away." She was crying harder now. "I won't be your emotional hostage anymore." I left her sitting alone with her tears and her consequences and the choice she'd made to control instead of connect. 2 weeks later, Gabriel contacted me through his attorney. He wanted to try co-parenting counseling. He'd been working with a therapist and wanted to establish a better relationship with the children. I agreed to counseling, made clear the marriage was over. The first session was at Dr. Chen's office. She'd agreed to facilitate as a neutral third party. Gabriel looked exhausted, sad, like he'd aged 5 years and 18 months. "I've been in therapy for 9 months, he said, not looking at me. "Since the divorce finalized, I significantly reduced contact with my mother 6 months ago after she showed up at my apartment making demands." He paused, breathed. "I'm starting to understand some of what she did. What I allowed. Starting. Not there yet. Still qualifying, still struggling. I still resent you sometimes," he admitted, "for forcing the situation." There it was, the victim narrative. I forced him by refusing to keep accepting abuse. But I want to try to be a better father. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just want to try. He looked at me finally. "Are you happy?" The question surprised me. "Yes," I said, and meant it. Genuinely happy. He nodded, looked down at his hands, at his wedding ring he'd finally removed. at what he'd lost by choosing his mother's comfort over my dignity for 15 years. 4 months later, 21 months after I'd walked out of my marriage, I stood at a podium looking out at 200 mental health professionals. Regional Family Therapy Conference. My book had sold 20,000 copies now, recommended in therapy support groups across 3 states. I'd been interviewed on 3 podcasts focused on family dynamics and divorce recovery. My supervised practice hours were accumulating, building toward independent licensure. That morning, my daughter had hugged me before school. "I'm proud of you, Mom, for teaching me that using your voice matters more than keeping peace." My son was adjusting well, new routine, stability, therapy, helping him process the divorce without blame. My sister had hosted a dinner party the week before, celebrating my progress with close friends I'd built over the past year. Maria had texted me yesterday. She'd just left her controlling marriage, moved out while her husband was at work. "I couldn't have done it without seeing someone else walk the path first," she wrote. I was scheduled to have coffee with my mother next week to see if we could begin rebuilding on honest terms. That evening I drove home to my rental house. My children were laughing in the living room. My sister was making dinner. My phone showed messages from my support network, speaking requests from 2 community organizations, an email from Rebecca about foreign rights inquiries for the book. I looked around at the life I was building, at people who had chosen to see me and support me, at children who were learning their voices mattered, at work that meant something beyond a paycheck. I had lost people who never truly valued me, and found people who did. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't performing or proving or trying to earn love. I was simply living in the truth of who I was, surrounded by people who saw me clearly, teaching others to find their own voices, and it was more than enough.